The third area I want to raise involves the role NHRIs could play in broader policy debates where the human rights voice too often remains absent or marginalised. Take as one example the advancement of the decent work agenda, which the ILO has championed and which increasingly is seen as an important aspect of strategies to achieve the UN Millennium Development Goals. It was, I'm glad to say, raised more than it has been in the past during the Development Summit Week in New York in September, and it's also reflected more in the outcome document from that Development Summit. My colleagues and I from Realising Rights have been working closely with the ILO over recent years to make the connections between the need for more employment opportunities, sustainable development, and the progressive realisation of economic and social rights, in particular core labour rights and the right to an adequate standard of living. In fact, I go from here to Liberia, where we have a workshop on decent work. We've been working with groups both in Liberia and Ghana on decent work over the last few years. We're convinced that if the idea of decent work is to truly resonate around the world and shape more inclusive and sustainable approaches to development, that the broad human rights community must be actively involved and seek to work with business, trade unions and governments in generating employment that protects fundamental rights and contributes to sustainable development. So I'm pleased that we have at this meeting that you've invited business and trade union representatives, and I would say that this is an area where national human rights institutions could support these key constituencies around the shared objective of generating decent employment for all. We must push governments to place decent work and the realisation of economic and social rights at the centre of development strategies. And that means rethinking the mainstream economic approach to the informal economy as well. Informal employment, as we know, in many developing countries includes up to 90% of the total workforce. In today's world of work, the formal employment relationship is often disguised or ambiguous. Informal wage employment often makes it difficult to actually identify an employer. Above all, the informal economy in most countries lies outside of the governance mechanisms that make economies function most efficiently and protect the rights of workers. And I'd like to challenge you as representatives of national human rights institutions. How much do you link with and identify with the concerns of the informal economy? How much are you trying to ensure that the informal economy is visible in economic statistics and policies? They need to have their voices heard in economic decision-making, and they must be seen as legitimate economic agents and targets of economic policies. Crucially, these workers need stronger and wider enforcement of global standards. So I believe that national human rights institutions could be a powerful ally in shaping a new international effort to tackle challenges associated with the informal economy, building on the report which I'm sure many of you are familiar with of the High-Level Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor, making the law work for everyone. You're well placed not only to engage your own governments on how their commitments to economic and social rights are being implemented within economic and development policy domains, but also in monitoring their efforts to implement core labour standards for all, including the most vulnerable, who are most often women workers. A sharp and lasting focus by NHRIs, individually and collectively, on decent work and empowering women in the workplace would be a huge contribution to the evolving business and human rights agenda. One final policy domain where I would welcome further dialogue and engagement with national human rights institutions concerns the challenge of addressing climate change. As some of you may know, I'm in fact very preoccupied with the issue of climate change and with the possibilities of developing a concept of climate justice. I wish I had the resources and capacities of John Ruggie to go around the world and develop this notion of climate justice, but I will be returning at the end of this year to Ireland, and I have a foundation on climate justice there, which will serve, I hope, as a centre for thought leadership, education and advocacy on the struggle to secure global justice for those many victims of climate change who are usually forgotten, the poor, the disempowered and the marginalised across the world. They have not been responsible for the emissions, but they are finding that the weather changes are very dislocating, especially for subsistence farmers and for indigenous peoples. We plan to work in partnership with a range of actors committed to empowering the poorest people and countries in their efforts to achieve sustainable and people-centred development. We're still in very early stages of our planning, but I would welcome dialogue with NHRIs. I'm aware that within the Commonwealth Forum of National Institutions, there's already a commitment to further engagement on the links between human rights and climate change. And this is an issue that affects us all, and clearly there's a role here for business and other stakeholders as well. Let me close by stressing that though I fully appreciate that many of your institutions are already stretched in carrying out your current work in often difficult circumstances, I firmly believe the emerging business and human rights agenda is one you should continue to prioritise. Companies will increasingly need expert support and critical guidance in monitoring their own progress and dealing with emerging issues at national level. Governments will continue to need a greater capacity and to be pushed to implement their human rights obligations, including the duty to protect against abuses involving business, and have independent assessments of their progress in this area. So all of you, as national human rights institutions, have a vital leadership role to play in such efforts and should be at the forefront of building alliances at national, regional and international levels to take this work forward in the years ahead. And the standard has been set quite high here of how to end a speech. What poetic thought would come to mind? I'm greatly helped by Navi, who said to me that she hoped I would think of something Irish. And what did come to my mind, and I'll actually say it in Irish if I may, presiding officer, there is a difference between Scots Gaelic and Irish Gaelic, but there's a lovely proverb that I grew up with in the west of Ireland, and it's ar scacha chéile a warren nadini. It's in each other's shadow that we flourish. And I think that's very true of national human rights institutions. It's in your shadows together, in your regions, it's in the International Coordinating Committee, it's in the working group now that you have on business and human rights. That's where you will flourish, building on the opportunities that you have at this 10th anniversary. So my final word is actually to my very good friend Alan. I didn't think when I came for the launch of the Scottish Human Rights Commission that you could possibly do this. Warmest congratulations to you and all who have worked with you. Thank you very much.